Oppression, terrorism, dictators, chaos and anarchy. These terms could all sadly be linked to the country of Somalia. The nation has seen government after government fail to assert their authority over the country, and while the nation could easily become a tourist destination, it isn't, and sadly most likely won't anytime soon. This is surprising considering that much of the country is beautiful, packed with wildlife, great cuisine, and historical sites. However, in terms of its security situation, the country still remains pretty dangerous, and although Somalia is definitely improving, the Somali government is still struggling to contain all these groups. So who are these groups? What do they want? And why is Somalia in this awful situation in the first place? Now, like all conflicts, to understand Somalia's current situation, you need to understand its location, its background information and history. So a quick recap. Somalia is located on the Horn of Eastern Africa, bordering 3 countries, Djibouti to its northwest, its longest border with Ethiopia to its west, and Kenya to its south. It's also important to note that the most northern region of Somalia, Somaliland, isn't controlled by the Somali government, but rather is controlled by separatists that seek to gain international recognition for their disputed country. Although it acts as a country separate from the rest of Somalia, it isn't recognised by the international community as such. Due to its geography, Somalia very much acts as a bridge between the wider African and Middle Eastern worlds. Also, Somalia has the longest coastline in all of Africa, which is how the two communities mostly interacted with each other historically, by boat. Size-wise, it's just under 250,000 square miles, making it a bit larger than the Central African Republic, and you guessed it, Central Africa, but yet smaller than France in Western Europe. In terms of its demographics, the country is overwhelmingly native Somali at around 85%. Instead, Somalia is usually primarily separated by clans, with the Izak in the north, the Jarood living mainly around the region of Puntland, with a few in the very south, and the Hawiyya living in the south-central bit of Somalia. Although much of these Somali clans and other ethnic Somalis do live outside of Somalia's modern-day borders. When it comes to religion, the vast majority at around 99.5% is Muslim, with the rest being a tiny community of Christians, etc. Now, its history, you only really need to go back to around the 1850s and 1860s. At the time, the only way you could travel via boat from, say, the UK to places like India to gain vital goods was to go all the way around Africa, across the Cape of Good Hope, and across the vast Indian Ocean. However, eventually, in 1869, a canal opened in Egypt, the Suez Canal. This greatly reduced the time, cost and effort to travel goods from Europe to southern Asia. You see, before this time, little goods travelled through the Red Sea, making the area largely irrelevant. However, once the canal opened, the area around modern-day Somalia became strategically important, and soon European powers began to eye up and colonise parts of the area. By the end of the 20th century, the 5 main areas in which ethnic Somalis lived was carved up by 4 different countries. The British controlling Kenya attached with Jubaland, and in the far north Somaliland as well. The Abyssinians took the region of Ogaden, the French took the most northern piece of Somalia, and the Italians took the rest. These artificial foreign-made borders would soon have a tremendous effect on the country. In the mid-1930s, fascist Italy invaded Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, and all Somalis in the Ogaden region would be united with the rest of Somalia. Soon, the Italians united even more Somalis by entering the Second World War on the Axis side and conquering and annexing British Somaliland. This was short-lived though, as British forces soon launched a counter-offensive and retook Somaliland and drove the Italians out of East Africa. But soon they came back, as in 1950, the United Nations gave them back their original part of Somalia in exchange for preparing the colony for independence, as what was now called Ethiopia fought with the British against the Axis Italians. Instead of possibly giving the Ogaden region to the new Somalia, the British instead gave the mainly Somali region to Ethiopia, despite many people in the region wanting to join Somalia. In 1954, the current Somali flag was designed, with the star's points representing the 5 historic regions that Somalis inhabited. 6 years later, Italian Somaliland would gain independence and unite with the recently independent, formerly British Somaliland. There was then speculation that Somalia would unite with French Somaliland, but instead it would stay with France following a heavily disputed referendum, before eventually becoming independent as the Republic of Djibouti in 1977 under a Somali president. Anyway, after Somalia's independence, the country sought to correct the foreign-made borders and would fund Somali separatists in eastern Kenya in what became known as the Shifta War. The country also fought a series of skirmishes with neighbouring Ethiopia over its shared border as well. However, tensions would largely cool down when in 1967, after a presidential election, Adin Abdullah Osman Dar, the first president, peacefully hands over power to a new administration, that of President Abdirashid Ali Sharmaki. He largely cools down tensions with Kenya and Ethiopia by ending the provocations. But while Somalia's foreign situation began to improve, its domestic situation radically changed. Just 2 years later, the president would visit the town of Las Anod in northern Somalia, where he would then be assassinated by a bodyguard. From there, the military orchestrated a coup where Marxist-influenced Said Barre, the commander of the armed forces, would take over. From here, the general would embark on numerous modernization campaigns, and while Somalia definitely developed under his rule, this was at the expense of people's political rights, as all opposition parties to his rule were banned. He also built a cult of personality surrounding him, along with tackling the influence of the various clans that held significant power within the nation. From here, his regime would find itself allied with the communist Soviet Union, but not for long. While Somalia remained domestically stable under his rule, his foreign policy got confrontational. He began to envision what is known as the concept of Greater Somalia, when neighbouring Ethiopia would plunge into chaos and civil war after the death of its emperor. He would become emboldened to back the Western Somali Liberation Front, a small group that wanted to unify with Somalia. Although as the group was too small, it struggled to achieve any of its objectives. And soon, Somalia would outright invade Ethiopia in 1977. After achieving major success at the start, its Soviet ally would switch to support the Ethiopians, deploying military advisors to help the Ethiopians, along with encouraging the Cubans to send troops, which it did to help the Ethiopians, which, with their help, eventually pushed back the Somalis back to the border. From there, what followed was an angry population at home, furious at defeat in Ethiopia. Soon, many military officers decided to remove him from power, although their attempted coup failed. And from here, opposing groups began to slowly pop up, and with Ethiopian financial support, the Somali government struggled to destroy them. However, with the Cold War on, the US decides to increase its financial aid to Somalia, which helped greatly when in 1982, Ethiopia would invade parts of Somalia before being driven back. However, although he managed to cling on to power, as the years went on, the rebel groups within his country only got more powerful, and his brutality to these groups, and mainly a certain opposing clan, the Isak clan in the north, would cause shockwaves throughout the country, with the conflict rapidly escalating as he lost control over practically the whole country within just a few years, and by 1991 he had to flee out of the capital to southern Somalia, where he would try to build up another army and retake power, but was defeated. After trying a second and final time, he would flee the country. From here, with Barre's regime gone, the groups would begin fighting each other. As the various groups became warlords, the country's economy and basic services soon collapsed, as famine and drought consumed the ruined countryside. The urban city soon turned to rubble, as the intensive fighting increasingly took its toll on its innocent civilian population. In the north, Somaliland soon declared independence in 1991, but would receive zero recognition. With the world watching the rest of Somalia closely, the United Nations would set up a mission to provide humanitarian aid to Somali civilians caught in the brutal fighting. The biggest problem for this UN mission was that warlords from all sides, and the groups that they were in, stopped and sometimes even killed aid workers as they attempted to provide help to the Somali people. This caused the US to send troops via helicopter to protect many of these aid workers and help stabilise the situation. However, a year later, in a special operation, 2 helicopters were gunned down by Somali militants, and the deaths related to this shocked the American people back home. The US soon withdrew from the country in March 1994. The UN would then follow suit a year later, abandoning Somalia, forcing the country and its citizens to fend for themselves. The following years for Somalia were catastrophic. Numerous small extremist terrorist groups began to spring up, kidnapping foreigners, spreading propaganda everywhere, launching terrorist attacks abroad, and committing mass killings within Somalia. Although numerous transitional governments attempted to reclaim control over Somalia and stop these groups, they largely proved unable to exercise their authority other than in small areas of Somalia. In fact, around this time, Puntland, a region to the north, declared its autonomy from the rest of Somalia. Furthermore, a new group emerged, the Islamic Courts Union. It soon achieved large success over the warlords before neighbouring Ethiopia invaded Somalia, as it feared the group would encourage separatism in its Somali-inhabited Ogaden region, along with being nervous next to a country controlled by this radical group. Whilst this was all happening further inland, in coastal Somalia, the navy had long been gone, and with it, many international shipping companies began to exploit the vast Somali waters, fishing heavily and even dumping toxic waste when people weren't looking. This obviously greatly annoyed the fishing communities along the coastline, and soon outright anger turned to action as they began to seize these ships and soon began demanding ransoms from international shipping companies. The piracy trade had now begun. With the trade costing billions to the international community, they soon stepped in, launching the infamous Operation Ocean Shield, dramatically reducing the amount of pirate attacks. Eventually, around the start of this operation, the Ethiopians would withdraw from Somalia, but this would lead to yet another rise of a radical Islamic group, Al-Shabaab. This group emerged from the now ruined ICU. However, it was a lot more than that. It soon forged links with Al-Qaeda, becoming a terrorist organisation. It largely manifested in the mainly southern parts of Somalia, still doing so to this very day, although in 2012 Kenya did invade a piece of southern Somalia to help dislodge them. They are definitely still around, it's just they are a lot weaker than they were before. Still to this very day, the group has been fighting with the Somali government. So that's the history of why Somalia is in a civil war. What is the conflict like nowadays? What does this Al-Shabaab group want? And who else is fighting? Well, as shown historically, this civil war was very much a typical civil war, a conflict between the central government versus mainly a bunch of different clan-based groups, all with different ideologies but one main goal: they wanted to see the fall of the government. Today it's more of a conflict between the government of Somalia, which wants to obviously stabilise and develop the country along with its allies, and two different terrorist groups with slightly different ideologies but are fighting each other. These are groups like ISIS, a terrorist organisation that functions mainly in the Puntland region of Somalia around the eastern Galgalar mountains. This brutal group basically wants to kill all non-Muslims and create a caliphate throughout the whole Muslim/wider world. And Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group linked with Al-Qaeda, largely operating all across the deserts of south and central parts of Somalia. This group wants to overthrow the Somali government, which it sees as corrupt and pro-Western. It then wants to create an Islamic state in Somalia, but like ISIS, with basically no Western influence. The group isn't really interested in expanding any further than Somalia, although many do wish to create a greater Somalia. They only want to fight in Somalia really. Now these are the active war zones. Somalia does have a conflict with the self-declared region of Somaliland, which claims that it's independent and so therefore is not under the jurisdiction of the Somali government. This has led to border clashes, occasionally with the self-governing region of Puntland over the disputed border. Furthermore, there is anger over their secession from the country, but it's unlikely that a full-on war with them will break out to reintegrate them into the Somali state. Despite all this fighting, to call Somalia a failed state today, like many would decades ago, would be unfair. The country's pirate problem is practically non-existent today. There are also less terrorist attacks as the years go on, and is slowly seeing a growing economy. Rather, it's best to call the country a rebuilding state. Although it is on the path to rebuilding itself, it still has a long way to go before the country is stable and safe. Hopefully this will be achieved someday. I hope you liked this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, with the bell notifications on. And as always, thank you for watching this video.